Sir Walter Raleigh's execution wasn't just a death. It was a grotesque performance. The blade didn't fall clean. His lips kept moving after decapitation, and his severed head went on a 29-year afterlife, a widow's home. This is the story of one of England's brightest stars, mean and more brutal and bizarre than you can possibly imagine. When the famed explorer, Sir Walter Raleigh, faced the executioner, he calmly asked to see Thiegs. Feeling the blade, he quipped, "This is a sharp medicine, but it is a physician for all diseases." But the medicine administered that day was far from simple. It was a spectacle of mangled flesh and a severed head that would then go on its own shocking journey, one that would last for nearly 3 decades. To understand the fall, you first have to see the heights. Under Queen Elizabeth I, Raleigh wasn't just a courtier. He was a star, a handsome, brilliant man from a well-connected family. He completely captivated Thackwin. She showered him with titles, estates like Sherborne and profitable Amopolis. He was even made captain of the men of the guard, a position of incredible trust. He was at the heart of England's ambitions, spearheading colonialism in North America and fighting the Spanish Armada. He was a true Renaissance man, writing poetry with the same fire he brought to a sword fight. But Raleigh's star was tied to the Queen. His swagger and ambition earned him powerful enemies, and his fall from grace began not with treason but with love. In 1591, he secretly married one of the Queen's own ladies-in-waiting, Elizabeth Bess, Throckmorton, without royal permission. To a queen who'd demanded the total devotion of her favorites, this was an unforgivable treachery. When she discovered the marriage and the birth of their child, her fury was absolute. Both Raleigh and his new wife were thrown into the Tower off London. Though he eventually clawed his way back into a measure of favor, things were never quite the same. That bond of trust was broken. And when Queen Elizabeth I died on March 24, 1603, the shield that had guarded Raleigh for decades vanished. The next man on the throne, James I, already deplid. Raleigh's enemies had spent years poisoning the new king's mind against him. The golden age of Walter Raleigh was over. A storm was coming, and it would tear his world apart. King James I had no use for a flamboyant Elizabethan hero. He had his own favorites to reward and a very different vision for England. Peace with Spain, Raleigh's lifelong enemy. Almost overnight, Raleigh's fortunes collapsed. He was stripped of his titles and income. Then in July 603, he was arrested and charged with treason for his supposed role in the main plot. A conspiracy to remove James from the throne. The evidence against him was a joke, resting almost entirely on the coerced confession of a single man. At his trial, Raleigh defended himself with such fire and wit that the public, which had largely disliked the arrogant courtier, swung dramatically to his side. He became a folk hero. Despotethus. The verdict was a farragana conclusion. He was found guilty and sentenced to the standard punishment for a traitor, the horrifying death of being hanged, drawn, and quartered. Yet on thievery day of his scheduled execution, a last-minute reprieve arrived from Necking. James, likely fearing a public rite over executing his new hero, commuted the sentence, but it wasn't Aperdon. Raleigh was sent back to the Tower of London, a man legally dead with sentence of treason hanging over him forever. He would spend the next 13 years as a prisoner. It was in the Tower that he wrote his masterpiece, The History of the World. His son Carew was born, and his health began to fail. He was a ghost haunting the new era, waiting for one last desperate roll off dice. By 1616, after 13 years locked away, Raleigh was a shadow of his former self. Now in his 60s, he saw one final desperate path back to freedom gold. He convinced the Perpetualica, chirp King James, to release him. Though not pardon him, to lead a second expedition to Ghana in search of the legendary city of El Dorado. The king's terms were dangerously precise. To maintain his fragile peace with Spain, James expressly forbade Raleigh from attacking any Spanish settlements. The expedition was a disaster from the start. Plagued by storms and disease, the fleet finally reached South America. Raleigh, too sick to go on, stayed with ships while a party led by his friend, Lawrence Keymis, and his ounce and Watt, when up the Orinoco River, the inevitable happened. The English party stumbled upon a Spanish outpost, Santo Toe, and attacked it. In the first minutes of the fight, Raleigh's beloved son, Wat, was shot and killed. The English tore the settlement apart, but found no gold. A distraught Keymis returned to Raleigh with the devastating news. Their son was dead. The expedition was a failure, and the king's order had been violated. Unable to face Raleigh's grief and rage, Sis killed himself. Raleigh sailed back to England a broken man. He had defied the king. His son was dead, and he had no gold. The Spanish ambassador demanded blood, and King James was happy to oblige. To appease Spain, James simply reinstated the 15-year-old death sentence. There would be no neutral. The axe that had been stabbed in 6003 was now ready. Sir Walter Raleigh was going to die. At 8 a.m. on October 29th, 1618, Sir Walter Raleigh was led to a scaffold in the old palisade at Westminster. A huge crowd had gathered. The authorities had timed the execution to coincide with the Lord Mayor's pageant, hoping it would be a distraction. It wasn't. The people camped for Raleigh. Suffering from a fever, Raleigh worried that his shivering would mistaken for fear. He addressed the crowd, explaining, "If disability in voice or dejectedness in countenance shall appear, you will ascribe it to sickness rather than to myself." He then gave a long, powerful speech, calmly, denying the old charges of treason and declaring himself a loyal Englishman about to face. God, he wanted the world, though. No, he was dying for a crime he hadn't commit. When he finished, he turned to the assembled lords and said, "I have a long journey to go. Therefore, I must take my leave of you." He was ready. As the scaffold was cleared, Raleigh prepared himself. He forgave High's executioner and refused a blindfold, reportedly asking, "Think you, I feareth shadow of the axe, when I fear not the axe itself?" He then asked to see the instrument of his death. The executioner showed him the axe. Raleigh ran his thumb along the edge. "This is a sharp medicine," he said, "but it is a sharp cure for all diseases." He laid Highshed on the block. The executioner, perhaps unnerved by Raleigh's calm or thingery crowd, hesitated. Raleigh had to signal. He was ready. Still, the executioner paused. Annoyed, Raleigh's voice cried out one last time from the block. "What dost thou fear? Strike, man, strike." The first blow was not a clean one. It took a second swing to finalize over the head from the body. For a moment after, witnesses claimed his lips still moved, as if in prayer. The executioner picked up the head and, as was custom, held it up for the crowd to see. It was then quickly placed into aired leather or velvet bag. Sir Walter Raleigh's life was over. But the bizarre story of his remains was just beginning. What happened next turns this. Execution into something from a macabre legend. Raleigh's devastated wife, Bess, begged the authorities for her husband's body. She wrote, "The lords have given me his dead body, though they have denied me his life. God hold me in my wits." His body was quickly buried at St. Margaret's next to the Palace of Westminster, but his head was not. Instead, it was embalmed and given to Bess, and for the next 29 years, so the story goes, Lady Raleigh kept her husband's preserved head with her. Accounts say she kept it in that red bag, sometimes in a case, showing it to honored guests who came to pay their respects to the great Sir Walter's memory. It's an almost two-dimensional image, a widow for 3 decades, living with the head of her executed husband. It was the ultimate act of devotion and a silent, constant protest against the injustice of his death. After Bess's death, the head passed to their son. Carew tradition holds that it was finally buried with Raleigh's body years later, but its ultimate fate remains uncertain. This grotesque afterlife is the final brutal chapter of Raleigh's story. A testamento, a life lived in the spotlight, and an end so horrific it continued long after his axe fell. Sir Walter Raleigh was a man of staggering contradictions. A poet was a ruthless soldier, a court favorite who died a traitor, a national hero whose execution was a political convenience. His story is a powerful reminder of how quickly fortunes can turn and just how brutal justice could. His final moments reveal a man of incredible courage. But the full story of his death and what came after reveals a level of strangeness and brutality that is truly hard to imagine.